What's up, everybody? It's the Digital World Podcast. And shout out to King Solomon for putting out this document. But I think it's really important. And we see here that it's from Professor Alex Pentland from MIT. And he did show a few connections. So if you want to check out his video, he gives a kind of overview of what Alex Pentland does and what he's connected to. I want to focus on this document, however, and see how what he talks about is really important, especially for what we're going into, which is a digital future, and we're going from the internet to the inner ledger. Okay, so I'll start here with the beginning. He said, during drafting of the Sustainable Development Goals, I was part of the UN Secretary General's Data Revolution team. So he was part of the United Nations. Okay, and that's a big deal because that's a organization that deals with um, nations worldwide. It was clear that digital systems were improving to be a fundamental revolution in human development, and so it was important that the power of data and data analytics be incorporated into SDGs. The subsequent years, this revolution has not stopped or even slowed down. The world is becoming ever more digital, and that is something we know. It's very clear that that is the case in point. We see the crypto space, it's becoming more and more incorporated into the current financial system. We see institutions adopting these digital technologies. We see even Swift, um, you know, chugging along with the new standards. Okay. And so he said that today this revolution is no longer proceeding application by application and nation by nation. Okay. We're starting to see separate digital systems for each application and each nation to unified all purpose digital ledgers that handle finance, commerce, capital, and tax transactions across the globe. Okay. And like we know here, the ledger, the XRP ledger, was designed um, for all handling all the money and all the payments. And so little by little, everyone will migrate to this ledger. And we know that central banks have been issued private ledgers. Okay, so they've been testing and trialing. And he says these new ledgers are also a natural home for an extension of CBDCs and are being promoted by trade countries such as Singapore, Switzerland, and China as a cheaper way and safer way to conduct business. And so he keeps talking about how there's an urgent need to achieve international consensus on standards and principles of governance, and this will be a critical issue for the UN and other multilateral organizations to address. And he says this now, listen here. He says we need a digital Bretton Woods Accord to establish the rules of international digital interaction. Okay, and then he talks about the rules, the universal deployment of rules and development goals by the UN are important. But anyways, my case in point is there was a Bretton Woods moment that happened August 10th to the 13th. And that is important because while it wasn't, publicized and made a big thing, something could come out of that. Okay. And they've been talking. I know Kristalina Georgieva, Christine Lagarde, they've been talking about a new Bretton Woods moment that needs to happen. Klaus Schwab, all these people. Okay. And then he makes mention of the evolution from, a communication to a transaction medium. So it's basically going from the internet of information to the internet of value. Okay, and he says here the very internet itself is being transformed, evolving from a loosely structured communications medium to a trusted execution medium. And that's important. That's great. However, there are obviously, some challenges. And he mentions the interledger here. He says national trust chains, which are a contraction of trust agreements and blockchains, are new all-inclusive distributed ledger platforms for cities, commerce, government, finance that are being deployed by governments. Okay. And so this is something that he says that through interoperability agreements, they form the emerging interledger. In addition to considerations of security and efficiency, deployment of trust chain platforms is being driven by the rush to issue national digital currencies, which use these same techs to facilitate payments and tax collection. So you can't set up these central bank digital currencies without having the interledger. Because at the end of the day, they want to be able to, first of all, collect taxes, track people, and be able to see their payments real time. Okay, don't think that we're gonna have a digital currency and the governments won't be able to see where these currencies are coming from, where they're being spent, and how they can collect theirs. Because there's two things that are sure in this life, and that's death and taxes, as the saying goes. And so he makes that case in point. Now, there's some driving forces behind this. He says perhaps the main force driving the development or the deployment of interledger technology is the need to repair the world's tattered finances. Okay, and also China as a major international power. We know they've launched a digital yuan, but yeah, it's we've been on the Swift banking system that was, developed and launched in the 70s. Okay, so that's, outdated for our case in point today. With global trade and the need for efficient payments, we know that right now remittances is shattered, it's shattered. And that's where Ripple, the company, has targeted as their first way to solve a problem, and they're using XRP to solve that. Okay, and I think that's important to note here. And also, he says that public debt are at levels not seen since World War II. Okay, and we see national economies in disarray, and he says that many nations are feeling that the time to act is now. Another game-changing and accelerating development has been that of national digital currencies and CBDCs. And remember, I was talking about lines of credit, and when the economy starts to become, um, let's say, when lending becomes tight, it's because the economy is not in such a good shape, and so banks tend to tighten their lending standards. Okay, but what happens, or I should say, what will happen when you know we see something greater than the financial crisis of '08? What's going to happen then? Who's going to come and create the solution to the problems? And I'm starting to think that, these ripple lines of credit um, will be, or I should say XRP will be the lender of last resort, because that's what's being used for these lines of credit. And when people or banks or institutions or nations have nowhere else to turn, will they turn to the native token of the XRP ledger, XRP, to help solve this issue? Because we already know that the XRP ledger can't handle lots of volumes, massive volumes of payments, and it hasn't had one failure since its conception. So there's that. And he said we need, however, which standards, norms, laws, and currencies will govern these new transaction platforms, and that's something that we need. And right now, there obviously the SEC lawsuit is in place, but once the courts decide on XRP, it's going to set the standard. Why do you think Stuart Alderati was talking about, buy Howie test, hello Ripple test? Because it's going to set the precedent for the space. And that's why this lawsuit is important. Yeah, a lot of things don't make sense, but it's setting the precedent for what could be the new Bretton Woods, which would be a multilateral effort that's going to be required by all nations. Okay? So another thing that he highlights as the challenges, he says that the as we let's see here, he said, in addition to the complexity of the transition to digitalization, another dimension which society needs to attend to is the overall velocity of change, driven by the exponential increase in network technologies. The velocity of change within the geopolitical and social context is unprecedented. Okay? And he says all of this demands that leaders have a more holistic and globally systemic view of how digitalization is impacting entire ecosystems. And he mentions that uh, we need to get this straight because security and privacy are basically going to be compromised. You know what I'm saying? He says, as 5G and Internet of Things technology are more widely deployed in the coming years, many nations will face increasingly disruptive cyber attacks. Now, Current estimates is that the frequency of such attacks would be an order of magnitude greater than today and would threaten basic government, health, food, power, and financial systems. And similarly, the impending deployment of national digital currencies may pose an even greater danger. Not only could hacks of a national digital currency cause immense real-world damage, but such systems can potentially allow tracking every purchase of every person. Such individual-level financial tracking poses privacy risks that dwarf current concerns. Okay, now, who has been talking about a comprehensive cyber attack that will be greater than the current pandemic? None other than Klaus Schwab. He said it would shut down hospitals, commerce, trade, food, everything, because we all depend on some form of energy. And if these grids are attacked, well, what do you do? And so this is the real um, thing that I think people should focus on. That yes, well, efficiency and faster transactions and greater or facilitating payments. While all that is good and great, you're exposing yourself to greater cyber attacks that can really cripple a nation if it targets specific things like government, health, food, power, etc. So that's where we're at today. And obviously, we're in the infancy of this stage of the digital era, but it poses real threats and risks, and that's something you need to think about. Anyways, this document is really good, and if you want, you can go ahead and read it. And that's what it's called: Our Digital Future from the Internet to the Inner Ledger. Hope this episode has brought you some value. Like and subscribe, comment below. What are your thoughts? As always, I like hearing from you. This is the Digital World Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.